Okay, you might notice I have this labyrinthian type maze behind me, and the reason is because this particular week that we're going into, it's October 1st right now, is going to it's going to open up avenues that you probably aren't expecting. I think that's probably a good way to put it. And uh, let's just launch into looking at this chart for this week because it's uh, it's got some twists and turns that are going to be entertaining, shall we say, entertaining at least to and for all of us. And part of the reason is that there are YODs in the mix this week. The moon is out of bounds all this next week. And let's dive into it. What is a YOD? A YOD is when two planets, like say Pluto and Neptune, are a sextile, 60 degrees away from each other. And the orb is, it's a little wider for a sextile than it is for the inconjunct or quincunx, 150 degrees, that is the part of the yod that brings in factors for us to contemplate. You can kind of see if we look here, Neptune and the moon, or Uranus, it's a little wide. The sextile is there. The inconjunct, it's not necessarily, it's not one of the inconjuncts that I'm going to be talking about this week. But it does involve planets that are in the inconjunct dance that we are about to experience. And the moon, moon right here. It's Monday. Moon is, just recently tickled Jupiter and is going to dance with Uranus right as the day on Monday begins. And if you haven't been fortunate enough to have clear weather, overnight each of these nights, the moon has been approaching Jupiter. And tonight, this is Sunday night I'm talking about, the moon and Jupiter are going to be holding hands. And there's an effervescence to moon and Jupiter together that I think is worth making sure that we're paying attention to. I'm going to just read you some yod stuffs from Karen Hamaker Zondag's book about the yod that is worth considering. Let me just bump ahead one day because that's when the yods really come into play. Here we have a sextile between Mars, Venus, the two archetypal connections to masculine and feminine energy, in each of them forming this magical inconjunct to Neptune over here in Pisces. Okay. Well, Mars is in Libra, Venus's sign, so there's some harmonics at work in the conversation language being used by these two planetary archetypal energies that I think is good to pay attention to. Venus is in Leo, a fire sign, which kind of inspires Mars, because Mars in Libra, not exactly in its strongest, yet to attempt to demean the Martian energy and say, oh, you're just challenged right now because you're in Libra. I think it could be problematic to attempt to contain and hold down that Martian energy. What tools do you think are available that are potent enough to do that? Anyway, the yod. It's remarkable that this aspect simply was not studied or was considered to be minor for so long, although this has fortunately changed over the last decades. This aspect is not new. Johannes Kepler referred to the 150-degree aspect and describes it as cutting sharply. Koch, who analyzed Kepler's study of aspects, describes the aspect as a clearly splitting tendency that sets both possibilities in clear-cut opposition to each other. Okay, you might notice right off the bat that we're dealing with when it comes to the yod or yod, whichever way you happen to want to say it, we're dealing with an aspectual factor that says, these planets are talking to each other, because that's what aspects are. However, the direction that one might aspire to understand by this conversation is not necessarily going to point us in a direction that we're going to be comfortable with, or that easily is going to be a zone where you can look to find the answer that you're looking for readily presented to you. More yod considerations. Don't be tempted to describe what you seek. You won't be able to do it. If those around you ask, explain that you simply derive pleasure by being busy with all kinds of things. Unfortunately, we're talking about children's education here. Unfortunately, the customer education system and school financing are not particularly helpful to children with unaspected planets or yods. Stringent requirements make it a challenge, and a lack of space for any inner seeking make it hard for these students. I'm just giving you some of the flavor of how a yod energy works. I'm going to give you several other things. Now, due to the fact that these currents prevent you from sticking to a sluggish and customary pattern and force you always to keep on searching, a capacity for deep wisdom and great power lies hidden here. If you are capable of accepting insecurity as the price for this ability, and you see that it is not meant to undermine you, but to keep you searching, a lot will already have been gained. I will always repeat this because it is a crucial point for dealing with yods and unaspected planets. Let the insecurity be for what it is, knowing that you just happen to feel it, but that the real situation is not your fault. See, there's something going on there. Although I have often heard the opinion that the apex planet is supposed to be the most important, the planet at the top, in this case, if we look at this chart and this particular, it would be Neptune that theoretically is this focus planet. In my experience, that has never been true. Many things to contemplate here, grasshoppers. In light of the above, which, generally there's a lot more that's been written between those last words that I read and this current moment, you might conclude that each planet in a yod entails a particular risk that can run out of hand from the previously mentioned insecurity and ambiguity, the lack of understanding, and erroneous projections down to the unpleasant events of stalemates. The extent to which such a risk will occur is, however, not to be specified. I do want to emphasize here that in the many cases I have investigated, I have noticed that you cannot say that whatever happens to the person who has a yod, all of us in this case are living through, this is only the first of 2 yods this week that I'm going to talk about, is her or his own fault. He should rigorously dispel the idea that it is a punishment for a mistake or sin, because you do more harm than good with such comments. I think the takeaway for the yod dances that we're going to be doing this week, as well as the astrology generally for this week, with these 2 yods taking place, will require of us that willingness to be wrong on occasion. This is part of the learning paradigm that we're invited into if we're going to grow. We must admit, an error has transpired that I likely inspired. Am I going to be willing to admit to it and grow? Or am I going to, suppress it in some fashion and maintain that illusionary state that is oh so perfect for who I am and what I am about? The soul essence of who each of us is. I can see it, slamming its forehead back and saying, oh my God, he's done it again. Not accepting his own faults and continuing to try to live within a fake set of realities that have been, manipulated heavily, most likely, to inspire something about him that isn't real. This is the energy that's in play for all of us this week. We have to ask ourselves, here the Mars-Venus, the masculine-feminine archetypal energies speaking, they're saying, Leo, take chances, be invigorated by, pushing the realms of your creativity into areas or arenas that you haven't been in yet. And Mars up there in Libra is saying, yes, I provide you with this energy of how you effectively interact with one another. And you must also include the fact that this yod, however you want to say it, I'm going to call them yods from now on, are aiming at Neptune. Unlimited levels of creative imagination at work. This is an opportunity, if we're willing to take it, to discover things that, aren't necessarily a final answer to something, but steps in a process. Are you willing to take those steps? This is what this yod is asking us, Is my understanding of the masculine feminine principle in my own makeup, appropriate? Does my creative imagination in that deepest, most profound Piscean realm allow for there to be flexibility in what it is that can be spawned or grow out of this interaction capacity that we share with one another? I have to emphasize this because we are in the season of Libra. The other is an important part of any equation that we are included in currently. It's always the case. It's just a little more emphasized at the moment. Okay. And on this day, oh, by the way, and the whole time of this week, the moon, which is going to be going from Taurus to Leo, is out of bounds. So, how we feel the moon about what it is that's transpiring is, it's providing us with what? Fuel, ammunition, if you will, to, take those chances that we wouldn't necessarily be inclined to investigate things. And what the yods invite us to consider is, don't try and aim for a final answer, because we're being given, information, opportunities to consider a broader range of potential. That is the flavor that this week brings to us, Not to try and get set in our ways, but to keep an open mind. Actually, I would say to keep an open heart, because that is where the soul growth really transpires from, or maybe through is a more appropriate way to see that. Bumping ahead a couple more days. A new yod puts in a picture. Oh, by the way, on this day, Mercury moved from Virgo into Libra. The inclination that this brings up for all of us right now is having conversations with each other. Well, I think that, comparing notes on what it is that we see as not necessarily what might be ideal, but more along the ideas of, I ran across this, and can I run it by you because I don't entirely understand it, but it's intriguing enough. I think we need to share it with one another. New yod, planet focused on Venus, and the sextile is between Pluto and Neptune. And I've already talked about this before. This is a very long-range sextile, but if we were to consider it from the deep and profound range of spiritual potential that Pisces represents, the deepest level of oceanic awareness, and Pluto, which says that, are you ready to transform? Are you ready to allow something that has been part of your life presentation to die and pass away? After all, Pluto works really, really well at allowing things to die and pass away. There's a reason for it. It's to present us with opportunity and space to be able to have other aspects of the living experience put in an appearance in our worlds that wouldn't be able to if the things that Pluto is killing off were not removed from the equation to provide that opportunity. Anyway, these two planets, they've been talking to each other. They're bringing it, Venus, how we interact with one another in Leo, taking chances, presenting ourselves out into the world. This isn't necessarily something that you're going to, as a Yod indicates, be able to put your finger on and say, this is it. I don't think so. This is only, the current moment's awakened experience that's, saying, hello, do you hear me? I'm calling. I'm not going to give you answers, but I'm going to give you things to contemplate as you grow the essence of what you as a soul being require to investigate in order to grow that soul awareness as you go along. It's not just all given to you. Oh, no, no, not. Also on this day, our out of bounds moon goes into Cancer, the sign that it has extremely strong resonance with. And so you'd have to make sure that in your inquisitive requirements, as this Yod is going on, as Mercury danced into Libra and says you need to talk with one another, the moon entering Cancer says, are you in tune with your matrilineal heritage? Do you include your ancestors in your considerations? The ancestors have answers. And it's always advisable to include them in your soul equation. And so for a couple days, 2.5 days as usual, the moon, out of bounds, because it's out of bounds all week long, is going to be, hitting that particular Cancerian note, saying, are you in tune with your roots? Do you know who is on your family wavelength? Do you feel that energy? Perhaps the ancestors are knocking on the threshold that is just beyond what it is you're used to experiencing, saying, are you paying attention to us? What day are we on? Thursday. Okay. And we finally come to conclusion of the week on Sunday. Just for a little extra panache. Mars squares Pluto. Mars, the traditional ruler of Scorpio, by the way, getting ready to move into Scorpio, squaring Pluto, the planet that has a modern affinity to the sign of Scorpio. If we throw together, excuse me, that yodel energy, no, I'm not going to yodel, that this week has inspired us and asked us questions to ponder, concluding with this Mars-Pluto square on Sunday, how willing am I, and I have to emphasize this, to allow an aspect of who I know myself to be, or suspect at least, to be transformed, to die per se in such a fashion that something can be released that has been getting in my way of what it is that my soul intended when I incarnated to allow blossoming space to grow into. The square, not an easy aspect per se, because that's what all squares are, but it asks us a very potent question. Is there that willingness to release those things that are no longer relevant? On that note, darn. Buttons keep moving all over my screen. Maybe it's that yodel. I'm still not going to yodel. But I think the meditative process that best befits this particular week ahead is to picture yourself in some kind of maze environment where the answers or the directions that you think you need to go in don't necessarily lead you to where you thought. Can you be comfortable with a dead end and something that you knew had to be the way? And yet, can you remain curious with what it is that is attempting to get all of our attentions this week? Remember, early in the week, Mercury going into Libra. Share your findings with each other. It's highly likely that, while not necessarily providing easy answers, it will provide us fuel to continue to investigate what it is that our soul has inclined us toward. So that's all I'm going to do for this week. Until next week, we'll see what else October has in store for us, and yodel on.